Ranking Diablo's 4 Barbarian's best leveling build in Season 1. What you need to level up as quick as possible. You can actually use any one of these builds to level decently fast, even the S tier builds to get as quick to level 50 and onwards. Not to mention, you can even swap them around as you level up depending on what aspects you have and depending exactly what level you are, since they do seem to perform differently at each stages of the leveling up. This is clearly biased based on my experience as leveling my Barbarians 2-ish, and obviously they differ in World Tier 3, World Tier 4 and onwards depending on what roles you get on your aspect and you know what uniques you also supplement to your builds. Starting off really quick with the Hammer of the Ancients build, a pretty iconic build. This is maybe one of the more consistent builds all throughout your leveling process. It starts really nice early on. It does seemingly start to trail off in the clearing of big packs, since its AoE is actually very small. It does actually work really well if you do get the Hammer of the Ancients aspect eventually to kind of extend the shockwave to, you know, have a bigger range on your AoE. But before that, your single target is really good. Your actual damage is really good for the ones that you do hit. However, it is very expensive in terms of fury, and it doesn't hit a lot of stuff, and considering how freaking annoying it is to get all of the range, archers, corpse, bows and all of that stuff, it is annoying to chase all of them down because they will never stay super grouped and your Hammer of the Ancients will never hit more than one at a time. So I'm going to put Hammer of the Ancients into A tier. Once again, this is going into, let's say, level 50, level 55, stuff like that, before you actually start into the mid game and then doing nightmare dungeons, not heroic dungeons, Jesus, nightmare dungeons. That is a totally different beast. This is just getting leveling up to snuff. Rend is also a different build to rank. Rend is a different build.
Your son is a genius.
I know a lot of people rank builds on all the classes. I know maxroll.gg has all of the leveling builds ranked already in a tier list against each other. Obviously, Barbarian is a little bit lower than other classes, but since we're just looking at Barbarian right now, we don't care about how fast rogues level. And Rend is usually ranked the highest. Now, I do think that Rend is an S tier leveling build, but it does have a caveat. Early on into the leveling builds, there are better ways to level where you almost one-shot monsters, because you're going to be leveling in World Tier 1. Listen, I don't care what anybody says, World Tier 1 is just way faster. You can probably optimize to do really good damage in World Tier 2 and benefit from the XP boost, but that amount of optimization just takes away from the time that you have to spend during leveling. And this is where Rend is a little bit weird, because Rend does obviously damage over time, which is probably the highest damage out here, but early on you don't need it. Early on you can actually one-shot stuff with other abilities, such as Hammer of the Ancients, for instance. It's just that Rend is more efficient and probably the best boss killer, so it kind of matters what you're doing. Obviously, if you're just playing, you know, dungeons all around, you're probably better off using something other than Rend, but Rend does start to get really good once you hit level 40s, and maybe when you're even doing your capstone dungeon, although I have had issues with my capstone dungeons while playing Rend up as much as optimized of a build Rend could be at level 44, 45-ish. I think I did my capstone, and I did it with a different build that we're going to talk about right now, but Rend is definitely really good. Damage over time has been buffed. You do need all of the little passives that slow. It definitely helps if you have damage versus slow, damage versus bleeding. Of course, damage versus vulnerable is definitely better, crit is definitely better, but you know, you can never choose and you're not going to enchant your leveling gear, because who's going to do that? Now, there's also the Thorns build, which is very interesting because the Thorns build is strong on Barbarian, surprisingly, especially early game, but you do need a couple of things to get it off. You cannot start, I mean, there's no Thorns at level 2, right? And let's say if you're leveling your alt, you have a couple of skill points from your Paragons, you probably still won't get to the actual good Thorns passives just yet, but there are pros and cons. First of all, once you do get to the Thorns passive, to Tough as Nails, to Challenging Shout, and especially getting those max HP passives to actually give you more and more Thorns, you start to actually feel the difference. I mean, you can see right here, the monsters are actually killing themselves when I pop my Challenging Shout, because this gives me more Thorns, and it does give me I don't remember if it does give me max HP, but it does give me more Thorns. So that is really, really, really good. And it's more gear reliant than the other builds. And you'll probably want Needle Flare at one point to make it more and more efficient. But because of the restrictions, even though the damage is really good, I will put this into B tier. I feel like Hammer of the Ancients does a little bit better in terms of leveling. It doesn't stress you out into finding the exact aspects. Obviously, if you get the Hammer of the Ancients one is good, but you can do without. Whereas with Thorns, it's fine, but the more you level up, the more the mobs will start to scale over you, and Thorns will be less and less impactful unless you actually get Thorns gear and Needle Flare. Upheaval is actually one of my personal favorites, and out of all the builds that I've tested early on, getting the first couple of levels, starting to get it into your rare so you can actually put aspects on gear, Upheaval is the best build. Upheaval probably has the most amount of burst instant damage early on from all of the Barbarian builds because it's just a big fat skill. It has the biggest AoE and it hits the hardest. It's also still very expensive, but it does clear the most. This is what I was talking about when I mentioned Rend. If you play, let's say, up until level 20, you're probably better off playing Upheaval because you don't benefit from things bleeding out when you can just one-shot them with Upheaval. However, Upheaval does trail off the further on you level. I started to not actually get any good value out of it in the later stages. I mean, maybe if you get lucky with some of the aspects, with some really good gear, maybe you can make it work. I was not particularly amazingly lucky at getting a lot of good items that can funnel into Upheaval, so I can only speak from my experience. It's good, but it's not S tier. I will put it into A tier. It's really good to start things off. It will get your gears going and sets you up to actually loot a lot more stuff and set whatever build you want up. Now, Whirlwind. Whirlwind is kind of like Rend, where early on, it's difficult to make it work because it's very expensive. It's not that, you know, mobs don't die. It's actually a very efficient build, and it's probably one of the most efficient builds, and it is what I was actually able to do my capstone with at level 44, 45. At level 44, 45, I tried everything I could with all of the legendaries and all of the gear that I had on my Barbarian. Whirlwind was the only one that I could actually consistently clear everything, not to mention because inherently the Whirlwind build, once you get to 30, 40, it starts to get tanky as well. It's actually very good to build up the toughness with Whirlwind consistently. Plus, you do need all of those building blocks. You need your shouts to build up fury. You're probably going to supplement those with stuff like ground stomp, with stuff like leap that can also generate chunks of fury every now and again until you get to the later stages when you can constantly maintain a nice upkeep of fury. One of the good benefits of Whirlwind is that it takes advantage of one of those passives. I keep forgetting that core skills make targets vulnerable. It's probably the most efficient core skill to give vulnerable to targets, and you're going to have a lot of damage. It suffers tremendously at boss damage, which is usually the strength of Rend, but otherwise, I think I will put Whirlwind into S tier, just because it definitely is a very good build, very good all-around build to get you started into, well, first of all, get you the capstone, get you into World Tier, well, not 4, but it definitely helps you get into the early stages of the Nightmare Dungeons and clears Hell Tides and all that. It's very, very, very good. Just watch out for bosses. Double Swing. I think, I think I know Double Swing, unless things change, is the best endgame Barbarian build currently. It's so far ranked. It has a lot of good stuff going for it. There are a lot of good Barbarian builds endgame, but Double Swing definitely seems to hit very hard. However, during leveling, it's atrocious. I am hesitant to put it into F tier, but it does have good boss damage, so I'll put it into C tier. It is so slow early on, and it definitely feels like it's very, very reliant on gear, which is not something that you want early on. You want to blast through the first couple of levels, well, the first 50 levels, and not have to worry about builds, about gear, about all of that stuff. You just want to go, so you can start doing Hell Tides and Nightmare Dungeons. Double Swing will not get you there very fast. It might end up being a little bit better. Every time I tried it, it felt so slow that I couldn't actually bear through actually making it work. And no other build has made me feel that way except maybe Thorns-ish. But it felt like Thorns gave me the freedom to use any core ability whatsoever. It can supplement any of the other builds on this list, whereas Double Swing is pretty pretty locked and loaded. I feel like you need some of those aspects and uniques that give you a lot more AoE, since double swing is very short, but it does have single target damage. This is how the ranking of the builds are in terms of leveling your Barbarian early on, because that's usually the more annoying part, since once you get to level 60, once you get to level 70, you start to get a clearer view of what the build should be. Whatever build you choose to have, you have more options and access to gear, as opposed to early on where you're just winging it. And if you do decide to wing it like this. But all in all, like, we can all agree that leveling is kind of poop. And if you don't agree, then watch this video, because we'll tell you why leveling is poop. Still poop even after all the buffs. Poop.